The sea was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The lighthouse stood against the night sky, its white walls streaked with salt and time. Inside, the slow tick of the clock filled the silence, marking the hours that stretched endlessly across the dark. Thomas Gray, the keeper, sat alone at the table, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea gone cold. He listened. Outside, the waves rolled and broke against the rocks, but there was something else, a sound. Faint, drifting through the mist like a memory carried on the tide. A voice. He stiffened. It came again, soft, fragile, almost pleading. It rose with the wind, curled through the cracks in the stone walls, and found its way into the small room. Thomas didn't move. He had heard it before. Every night, in fact. And each night, it grew harder to dismiss. He set the mug down, the porcelain clinking against the wood. His breath caught. Not again, he whispered, but the sea never kept quiet for long. Thomas Gray had once been known as one of the most reliable lighthouse keepers on the coast. For 40 years he kept the lantern burning through storms and fog, through nights when ships relied on his vigilance to avoid the rocks. He was respected, steady, a man who believed in duty, but retirement changed the rhythm of his days. The sea no longer demanded his watch, yet he could not tear himself away from the tower he had tended all his life. The town thought it simple attachment, a man unwilling to leave his post. What they didn't know was that Thomas stayed because of the voices. The first time he heard them, he thought it was the wind. Then, he told himself it was the sea itself, groaning through caverns and cliffs. But soon the words were clear. Cries of men, calling for help, shouts swallowed by water. Sometimes even laughter, brief and broken, echoing from the deep. That was when Daniel, a young historian from the mainland, arrived. Daniel came with notebooks and questions, eager to document the fading practices of lighthouse keeping. To him, Thomas was a relic of another era, a living record. But Thomas knew Daniel would hear more than stories of lantern oil and logbooks. He watched the boy carefully, wondering if he should share the truth. For Daniel, the stake was knowledge, an understanding of how the past shaped the coast and its people. For Thomas, it was far heavier. It was about memory, about the dead, and about whether their voices meant forgiveness or condemnation. It was a night like any other, the lantern above slicing through the darkness. Daniel sat at the wooden table, pen scratching against paper as he questioned Thomas about storms, rescues, and the loneliness of the job. At first, Thomas answered simply, his voice low and steady. But then the whisper came again, curling through the cracks like smoke. Daniel froze. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Thomas closed his eyes. "I hear it every night." Daniel frowned. It sounded like someone calling. Thomas looked at him, the weight of decades behind his eyes. "They are calling. Sailors, lost to the sea." Daniel wanted to dismiss it, to explain it as some trick of acoustics, but the look on Thomas's face stopped him. The old man wasn't mad, and this wasn't a joke. The air in the room thickened, the steady tick of the clock louder, sharper. Outside, the waves crashed harder against the rocks. The voices grew clearer, as if emboldened by acknowledgement. "Help us!" one cried. Another, softer, pleaded, "We can't find the light." Daniel gripped his pen tighter, unsure if he should write or pray. The sea was wild that night. Waves slammed against the rocks with such force that the lighthouse itself trembled. The lantern beam swung out across the endless black water, a lone spear of light in a storm that seemed intent on swallowing the world. Thomas stood in the tower, shoulders squared against the wind, coat flapping like a flag. Daniel was beside him, pale but resolute, clutching his recorder as though it were a lifeline. The voices came quicker now, urgent, overlapping, desperate. Men crying, women screaming, children sobbing, all of them crashing together in a storm of sound. It was deafening, unbearable. Then, cutting through them, a single voice. "Thomas!" It was clear, steady, almost calm. Daniel glanced at him. "That one. It knows you." Thomas gripped the railing until his knuckles blanched. "I hear it." The voice spoke again. "Keeper of the light. Why did you leave us?" Thomas's heart clenched. His mind shot back to the Artemis. That night, the fog had rolled in thick, the storm blinding. He had tended the light as always, but they never saw it. 6 men went down. "I didn't leave you!" Thomas shouted into the storm. His words tore from his throat. "I kept the light burning. I always kept it burning." The other voices fell silent, as if waiting. The calm voice answered, "We saw the light, but it was too late." Thomas's eyes filled. He pressed a hand against the cold glass. "I tried. God knows I tried." Daniel stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Thomas, maybe this isn't about what you did. Maybe it's about what you can do now." Thomas turned on him. "And what's that, eh? Raise the dead? Rewrite the sea?" "No," Daniel said, his voice steadier now. "But you can give them what they've been denied. A witness, a keeper, even in death. Maybe they just want someone to carry their story." Thomas looked back at the darkness. The calm voice spoke once more. "Do ye now hear us?" He swallowed hard. "Aye, I hear you." And then, with all the strength of a man who had spent his life watching the sea, he shouted into the storm, "I will not forget you, not one of you. You are heard and you are remembered." The words rang out, torn by the wind, but carried all the same. The silence that followed was immense. Then slowly the voices faded, like a tide receding. First the cries, then the shouts, until only the sea remained. The 2 men descended the spiral stairs in silence. In the kitchen below, the kettle rattled faintly on its hook, as though nothing had happened. Thomas sat heavily in his chair. His hands trembled, but his eyes were clearer than Daniel had ever seen them. "They're gone," he whispered. For now. Daniel placed the recorder on the table. He hadn't pressed play all night. "You didn't need me to capture it. You needed me to hear it with you." Thomas managed a small smile. Maybe that's the point. A keeper's job isn't just to shine a light. It's to make sure no one's lost alone. Over the following days, the sea returned to its ordinary rhythm. The gulls cried, the waves rolled, and the tower stood firm. But something inside Thomas had shifted. He no longer feared the night. When the wind rose, he listened without dread. Sometimes faintly he thought he still heard whispers, but now they no longer clawed at him. They sounded almost at peace. Daniel prepared to leave, his notebooks packed. Before he went, he paused at the door. "Thomas, what do you think they wanted, in the end?" Thomas gazed out at the horizon. The light swept across the water, steady, endless, to know they weren't forgotten, to know someone still carries their names. Daniel nodded, though he looked uncertain. "Do you think they'll return?" Thomas's answer was soft. "The sea never keeps quiet for long." That evening, Thomas climbed the tower alone. He lit the lantern, watching its glow spread across the restless water. For the first time in years, his chest felt lighter. The voices might come again. They might not. But he would be ready, as he always had been. And in that moment he whispered to the night words that belonged only to him. A keeper's duty never ends. It only changes shape. The wind carried his words outward, and he imagined they might travel farther than light itself. The lighthouse stood as it always had, silent, steadfast, indifferent to storms or time. Yet within its walls, something had changed. The man who once bore only guilt now carried something different, the memory of the lost, not as a burden, but as a promise. And so the question lingers, as the waves beat their endless rhythm. When the sea speaks, are we meant to fear its voices, or to finally listen